Hi, welcome to Sewing with Sandi. I'm Sandi and today we're going to take you through a sew along for Vogue, very easy, 9253. Now this pattern was all the rage probably about 4 or 5 years ago. Everybody was making it and I've had it in my stash since then and I wanted to give it a try. I bought a very cute, adorable fabric from Mood a while ago, hoping to make this dress, but when I went to cut it out I didn't have enough, so I cut the bottom out in the fabric from Mood and then a surprise fabric from Elliott Berman for the top, and I'll show you that in just a second. But one of the things we're going to conquer in this dress is that deep V. I'm not interested in having it that deep. I'm going to construct the garment the way it's made to be constructed, and then we're going to put some kind of modesty panel inside there to give the look of the elongation of that really long V, but also to give us a little modesty, right? So it's pretty simple. It's very straight lines, not a lot of work. Couple of darts, seam. These sleeves are grown on, so that's pretty straightforward, and I did do the sash and I'm doing the full length version. So let's get started. All right, here we are. I have all my pattern pieces cut out. I determined what size I was going to make and then cut the pieces out in this beautiful rayon dotted fabric. You can see how soft and floaty that is. Will work perfectly with this skirt because it's very flowy. Look at the size of those pockets. They're enormous. Aren't they great? Very deep pockets. But since I didn't have enough to create the whole garment out of this pebbly fabric from Mood, I used a different fabric for the top, kind of made it a little elegant. I have this fabric that I won from Elliott Berman. Every Friday they have a fabric love giveaway, and they on Instagram, Elliott Berman Textiles, and I'll put a link in with the description. And I actually won, and I won a bunch of cute fabrics. So this was one of them. It's shimmery and glittery, which I love. So I cut the sleeve, and you can see the sleeve is like just grown on. So I cut the sleeve on the edge so I don't have to hem it. All right, so I'm going to use this salvage edge. It's a little bit of ruffles just to kind of rough it up a little bit. And then because this fabric on the back side is a little rough, I am going to line it. So I just have some, inexpensive brown lining that I happen to have lying around. So these fabrics were from my stash, and we are going to get started. So this type of garment, there's several pleats here. There's pleats here, 2 pleats in the top and 2 pleats in the skirt, and then also in the back. And that is going to allow us to give it some shape. So we don't really have to do a lot of fitting. I think if you get the general idea, this waist area is going to be a little bit more significant as far as measurement goes. But I measured myself and I measured the pattern pieces. I did straighten out the curve of the waist a little bit. So this is a little bit of an umpire waist, right? The waistline is up here and this is very curvy. So for me, I did straighten that out a little bit because I want it to fit, and I can always nip that back in as I go. So we are going to begin, and I'm going to walk through this with you. I haven't made this before either, so we're going to do step by step, one step at a time. So the seam allowance on this is 5/8 of an inch. We always want to check, and that's one of the first things that we check when we're reading our instructions is what the seam allowance is. Traditionally, for the big 4 patterns, it's 5/8 of an inch, but sometimes it's not. So we are going to do version B. We're doing this long version of the dress. All right, we're going to put the pleats in the front. That's step 1. That's the first thing we want to do. And I have marked my pleats on here. Here's the small pleat and then a large pleat, and these actually give the garment some depth to accommodate the bust. And what you want to do is you want to bring the small circles to the big circles, small circles to the big circles. That way, on the left and the right, they'll both be facing the right direction. So I'm using my lining because it's just easier for you to see the marks on there. So here, this is the side with my large circles, and I'm going to bring my small circle to my large circle. I'm just going to quickly throw a pin in there. But this one down at the bottom, I'm going to line up these marks and make sure the bottom of my garment is even, because that's really what's going to create my pleat. Now I can take this top one out. All right, I'm going to do the same thing with the smaller one. I'm going to bring the small circles to the larger circles, and you can see that it gets a little fussy. So that's why I like to just kind of pin this top piece, because it's easier to navigate. So now that top piece is pinned in place and it's just a holder. Now I can manipulate this bottom piece so it all lines up correctly, which is what I want. Then I can take this holding pin out. So this is what I have. I've brought them. So these are pleats, right? They're not darts. They're just stitched down here at the bottom, and they actually open up. All right. So this is my center front, right? And the pleats are going to go, this is my center front over here, and the pleats are going to go towards my center front. So I'm going to do that for both of my lining pieces, which you wouldn't probably have unless you have a fabric that requires lining. And I'm also going to do it with my fashion fabric. So that's going to be the first step that I'm going to work on. So here is my lining piece, and you can see that I've just basted my darts. Our seam allowance is 5/8 of an inch. This is just to hold these darts in place, or these pleats, sorry. And what we want to do is baste them within the seam allowance. So if the seam allowance is 5/8, I basted these at 3/8 of an inch. That way they're just holding them together, but they're not going to interfere with my seaming. So they're all set, and especially if I'm going to be stitching right here about 5/8 of an inch, there's plenty of room. So the next thing that the instructions want you to do, which is step 2, again, I'm going to show you on my lining. They want you to finish this leading edge here. So you're going to be finishing this leading edge of the garment. So you would turn it under 5/8 of an inch and press it. And then you're going to turn that in on itself again and press it. So you have a nice finished edge. So it will look something like that. So you press it at 5/8 of an inch, and then you can go ahead and turn that raw edge in and then top stitch it. Now for my purposes, I am going to sew my lining to the V-neck, and I'll show you how to do that in case you do want to line it, because you might want a little more coverage up there. You also might want a little more structure depending on the style of the fabric, the type of fabric that you have. So in order to do that, I am just going to take my fashion fabric. Now remember, this is not, we're going off the pattern now at this point. So this is my fashion fabric. This is the right front. So this is the V line that goes down the front. And then this is my lining. And let's see, do I have the correct one? I'm going to put them right sides together. So I need to make sure I have the correct lining. And I'm going to put them right sides together, and I'm going to stitch along this V line right sides together, because that way when I finish and I turn them over, the lining will be on the inside and this edge will be finished. So I'm going to go do that now. But if you're not doing that, remember, if you're not lining it, you're going to turn that edge under 5/8 of an inch and then turn it in again and top stitch it to finish that seam. Okay, I remember I'm doing a lining piece. So you are going to, if you're not lining it, you're going to follow the instructions and double fold that front hem so you have this nice clean edge here going down. Since I am going to line my piece, what I did was I sewed the lining, here we go, I sewed the lining to the fashion fabric along that neck edge. And then I pressed the seam allowance towards the lining. So it goes this way. So here's my seam allowance, and I pressed it towards the lining. And then I top stitched the lining to the seam allowance. And what it does is it anchors the lining to the seam allowance in the back, And one of the things you want to be really careful is that you don't have, like, this isn't folded. You don't have any little ripples. You want it nice and smooth, and you want to stitch that, because what happens after you do right close to the edge is it gives you this absolutely gorgeous edge, and the fabric doesn't roll forward. So it keeps the fabric in place because now the lining is actually anchored to the seam allowance, and you have this absolutely gorgeous edge. Now, because I am lining this, I am going to baste my lining all the way around my garment pieces in order to just have them as one unit, right? I did the raw edge, the salvage edge for my sleeve hem, but if you were going to hem this, you would baste it and you would hem it as one unit. I'm actually just going to hem the lining because I'm going to leave this raw like that. I want that look, that kind of ravelly look. And this fabric, this weave is coming apart, so I'm going to stitch my pieces together so they'll look like one unit, and then I'm going to serge all the way around them just to, I'm going to overlock them just to keep this from fraying. So those are the two front pieces, and we'll be done with those. And then we're going to start to work on the back piece, the upper back. The first thing they want you to do is to stitch this neck edge. So essentially what you're doing is you're taking one piece of fabric, not the two of them together, one separate piece of fabric, and stitching, and again, I would stitch it a 1/2 inch or 3/8 of an inch inside the seam allowance, just around the neckline, because this is cut on a bias, and we don't want it to ruffle out of shape until we finish the edge, and we have to manipulate this a little bit. So we don't want it to get out of shape before we have a chance to finish it. So that just holds it in place. We're going to do that, and then we're also going to make this dart in the back. And these darts and the two pleats on either side of the front are a great place to make adjustments if you need a little more space, if you need a little bit more circumference. You can make that dart a little bit smaller, and it will give you a little bit more area for the garment to fit. So they're great fitting seams, right? So we're going to go do all of that, and then we'll be back, and we're going to get started on the skirt. I often get asked, how do you know if something fits, or how do you fit yourself by yourself, which is an issue. And I was a little nervous about this fitting, so I made this dart in the back about half as small. So instead of making it this wide, I went to the center and I made it this way, but I still made it the same length. And then I pinned my front to my back at the shoulders and under the arm, and then I pinned the two back pieces together. And you want to put your pins like it would be a seam. So you're sort of seaming them along the edge, right? You're sort of putting your pins as a seam so you can actually put the garment on. So you put them parallel to the seam. And I put it on inside out because it's all full of pins, and tried it on and made sure that this little front piece closed, which is the way the pattern is drafted, and it fits perfectly. So now I can take the pins out and move forward to the next step. I didn't want to get too far along the process before I made sure that it actually fit. So I have gone ahead, because I'm lining this once again, I have gone ahead and stitched my lining. I've kind of basted my lining, I basted my lining to my fashion fabric, just so now it's one unit. Pretty simple. If you don't have lining, then you can skip that step. It's not an issue. And then, let me unpin the back here. Oh, this fabric is so ravelly. And then I made the dart. You can see the dart is in the back. And I'm going to show you with the white thread. You start at the tip here, and you gradually get larger and larger until you reach the width of the dart. And then you press the dart flat on your ironing board, and then you press it towards the back. And what you're going to end up with is this beautiful, almost invisible dart. You can't barely see that. That's the tip of the dart right there. It just gives the back a little shape, and it looks, you can't even see it in this fabric. You can barely see it. So no, we're looking right at it. We're looking for it. So in the back of the garment, no one is even ever going to see it, but it's going to give our garment a little bit of dimension. So like I mentioned, the next thing we're going to do is stay stitch this edge. I'm going to go and apply my lining to my back pieces just the same way I did to the front. I'm just going to baste them within the seam allowance all the way around so they're like one piece. There's several ways to make a lining. You can make two garments and then sew them together, usually at the neck edge and the arm edge or the cuff or something along those lines. Or you can sew them together so these individual pieces are lined. And since I'm just lining the top, I think if I was lining the whole dress, I would probably make two dresses and then sew them together at the neckline. But since I'm doing it this way and I'm essentially following the pattern, I'm just making this layer 2 layers instead of 1. Now I have my 2 back pieces and my 2 front pieces, and they're all stitched together with my lining, which you would only do if you're lining them. And again, for the back, I just stitched it to the wrong side to make it one unit. One note about lining something with a dart, because this has that narrow dart in the back, I just folded the lining. You want the fabric to give you the dimension and the depth that you need, but you don't need a dart in the lining. I mean, you can make one if you want, but it's not necessary. So now we are going to take each half and sew the shoulder seams and the underarm seams. So we are on step 5, and we're going to stitch the back to the front. So here is my back because it has the dart in it, and then I want to find the corresponding front piece, and I'm going to put them, that is not it, this is it, I'm going to put them right sides together. So fashion fabric, right sides together, and I'm going to pin and sew this shoulder seam up here, and then this underarm seam down here, and I'm going to do that for both sides. And then we'll have 2 halves of a dress put together, which is a little odd, but that's the way the construction is going to go on this one. And then we'll finish the neck edge. All right, we finished step 5. We sewed the back to the front. So we have 2 sleeve sections. All right, this is the other back. 2 sleeve sections. This is our back. This is our front with the finished edge. And now we're going to finish this neck edge because this front edge is already finished. We're going to finish the neck edge binding. So it asks you to buy binding. I never buy binding, and for a couple of reasons, and I've done videos on them, and I'll pop a link in for it. But if you want the fabric quality, feel, draping, you want matching, you want to use the same binding that your garment is. It takes a few minutes to cut a piece of binding strip and press it. So I serge this. Normally I don't, but I serge this because this fabric is so ravelly. It's a very loose woven. But you want to make bias tape because it stretches, and you can navigate this stretch around a curve. And this will match perfectly. You don't have to worry about it not matching or it not being quite the right color. And also the fabric quality is good. This this one little strip for 2 little neck edges. It only took a second. So what we're going to do is we're going to attach this binding to this back neck edge to finish this off. And this front juncture where the shoulder seams come together, this is finished and this is not. So I'm going to overlap my tape, and you can see that I've pressed this so there's 2 folds here. This first fold is where I want to stitch, and I don't want to stitch on the fold. I want to stitch just a little closer to the edge from the fold, because the fold actually takes up space when you're folding it over your garment. So here's my seam. I'm going to start my tape a little bit past my seam so I can fold this edge over when I'm finished. So I'm going to start stitching right there on the seam. And remember, we pressed our top seams towards the back. And then you can see that this will curve very nicely around this neck edge, and it'll give you a beautiful finish. So just pin it along, and I'm going to stitch it, and then this is going to end up being the same length as my back, and I will lop that off later. So I've stitched this one. This one's ready to go. I stitched it. I left a little tail here at the edge, and I've stitched it. So I'm going to cut off this extra because I don't need it. And now it's the same as my neck edge. And I'm going to fold this end in so I can create a nice edge there. And then I'm going to fold my bias tape around my seam allowance. And then fold in that section, the other section that was pressed, right? I had this pressed section that I stitched with, and this other pressed section is to finish the inside edge. So as we roll this in, as I roll this into the other side, I'm going to fold in the edge. So we have this really nice, pretty finish on the inside, and I'll do that all the way around the edge. If you're struggling to get this in, I mean, mine is fitting really nicely, but if you're struggling a little bit, you can trim, go back and trim these seams where you sewed it on a little bit if you need to. You do want this finished on the inside, and then you're going to slip stitch this with a needle and thread just to close it up and make it all nice and pretty on the inside. So what you have when you're finished is a beautiful neck edge that matches your fashion fabric, so you don't even see it, but it's finished this off along with, this is unfolded, along with your beautiful neck edge that's finished off in the front. And on the inside, this is all stitched by hand, so it looks fabulous. It's absolutely gorgeous. Can you stitch it with the machine? You can try. You would have to stitch in the ditch, and you would have to make sure that this is past it, and what happens is you have this ridge here. I don't particularly care for that. If you want something a little more high-end, a little more couture, it'll take you maybe 15 minutes to stitch both of these. It isn't that big of a deal. So we're gonna go stitch those. I don't need to show you how to do that on the machine, on the video. Pretty sure you can handle that on your own. Now, step 9 is to do the sleeves. I am not doing a sleeve on this because I'm not hemming it, because I'm leaving this salvage edge raw as a design feature. But if you were going to hem them, you would essentially turn them up. You would either serge them or finish this edge and turn them up and stitch them. They're stitched by hand. So that's pretty straightforward. It will be the same method that we use to stitch up the skirt. So that, our top is now completed, sort of. It's in 2 pieces. We will take care of that when we put the zipper in. We're going to turn our attention to the lower half, and we're going to start with piece number 3. All right, here's the top of piece number 3, and we have these pleats. Again, we're going to put a pleat in the bottom half of our garment, and what we want to do is we want to move the pleat. We want to move the pleat to the long circle. So we want to bring the small circles to the large circles. Now I'm going to pin mark mine, but you can certainly use a marker. I think that pin marking works just fine. And in order to do that, I lay my pattern down on top of my fabric, and I put a pin in each one of the circles. So that's going through both layers of my fabric. And then I lift this up and I repin the top fabric where the pins are. And I take the pins out of the tissue layer. And I open it up and repin into the top layer of my, well, through both layers actually, of my fabric where the tissue pins are. And then I go back and I remove the tissue pins. So now my garment is marked, but only on this side. So if I flip it over to do the other side, I just put a pin in the same location, but going in a different direction where my pins already are. So you can see that this was a mark on the tissue. You can see this was a mark on the tissue, and I have a pin going this way, and I have a pin going this way. And when I take my pieces apart, both of them have pins. You can see a pin here. Both of them have pins for marking my fabric. Now it's a simple matter of drawing one set of pins, the small set, which is the outside set, to the large set. That's pretty quick. And I'm just going to pin this one in place. I'm going to do the same thing with this one up here. I'm going to draw the small dots to the large dots, and I'm going to pin that in place. And now I have my pleat, and I will do the same thing on the other side. So now I have my pleat. So they ask you to baste this line now. I would press it first and then baste it. I'm assuming that it's going to come out later, but I'm doing this pattern the first time just like you guys, so I don't know. I haven't gotten that far into the pattern, but you definitely need to baste this across, and you want to baste it within the seam allowance, right? Because you don't want to have to pull the basting stitches out. You don't want to see them. So we're going to go ahead and do this, and when we come back, we are going to stitch the front sides together. So we're going to stitch the front down the center front seam. All right, it's time to do our pockets. We have our back piece here, and we have our pocket piece. And I like to lay things down face side up, so I know that this is how they're going to go together. On the pocket, there is a notch, and there's a corresponding notch on the back piece, and I have marked those with a pin. And what you want to do is you want to make sure that these two pins line up, or marks if you use a marker. Additionally, this top, the top of your garment, needs to line up, because this pocket seam, the top of this pocket seam, needs to be inside the seam allowance in order for it to stand up. So if it isn't in this waistband seam allowance, it's going to flop around, and then that's going to look ridiculous. So we're going to go ahead and stitch this pocket. We're going to pin it and stitch it, and we're going to do it to the left back, the right back, and the left and right front. And they should all line up when we're done. It's a big pocket. All right, let's talk about the pockets. Pockets in anything, especially a dress, but pockets in anything add so much more wearability. Gives you a place to put your hands. You don't want to carry too much in there, but if you need a couple of bucks, you can throw it in there. A credit card. Pockets are the best. Now, we've sewn our pocket to our side, right? And I've serged this because I've overlocked it, actually. I overlock everything. I just think it looks better. But I've sewn this pocket to this side. I haven't pressed it yet. And you can see it's rumply. If I open it up, it looks okay. I mean, I did a really nice job sewing it. But I want to impress upon you the art of pressing as you go, which makes such a big difference. So here, this one has been pressed. And look at how much nicer that is. This one's flopping around. Let's get it in the camera, right? This one's kind of floppy. This one's beautiful and nice and flat, because eventually this seam is going to have to fold under, right? That pocket's going inside there. So we want this to be as neat as possible. One of the items that they don't ask you to do, which I think you should do, is to understitch the pocket. Once again, and I'm surprised, Vogue patterns tend to use really good techniques, but they missed this one on this pattern. So I want you to understitch the pocket, which is just stitching, just like we did with the neckline, stitching the seam allowance to the pocket, because the pocket is going to be inside. So I just, after I pressed it, and I made sure I pressed it really well, I added a row of stitching on the pocket side so you won't see it. And what happens with that, when you eventually go to press your pocket and turn it in, this is the kind of pocket seam that you get. Look at how gorgeous that is, right? It's beautiful, it's crisp, it's sharp. It also has some sturdiness to it, and it's going to look gorgeous when we sew our pockets. So keep that in mind as you move forward. It's a little step, it doesn't take that long, but certainly it's something that you want to consider as you're going forward. So now the next step is to sew our side seams in our pockets. So I'm going to, see, that's the wrong side. Lay my pocket on top of, right, so this is my back piece, this is my front piece, and I want to line up the pockets, my nice pressed and understitched pockets, and I'm going to stitch them all the way down here to up to where the dot is. So here is my tissue paper, and there are two dots. There are two dots on the side seam of your dress. This one you sew to, right, and then you stop, and then this one you sew to and you sew down. So these two dots are very important. You leave this open in between because that's where your hand goes. So that's why we finished off the pockets. And sew this from here. So now that I have this here, I'm going to sew from here to the dot and back tack a little bit, right? And then I'm going to sew all the way around my pocket back up to the dot, and then from the dot all the way down to the hemline. And then our backs will be attached to our fronts, and we can move on to putting the zip. All right, a couple of tips when you're sewing the pocket. I have pinned my pocket, and we have to sew down this length to the dot, and I've put a horizontal pin there to mark my dot, and then from this dot further on, and again I've put a horizontal pin there to mark my starting point. This is where my hand is going in. Normally I don't pin along the seam line, but the trick with this one is that you have to get your stitching beyond the seam that you've already sewn. And you don't want it way out here because that's going to change the length of your garment. So you want it to be right on the edge. And I use my zipper foot to sew this section and this section because the zipper foot allows me to ride right up to next to the seam and stitch very closely to an edge stitcher would work. Anything along that lines that allows you to ride closely, because if you use a regular presser foot, this is so much higher because we've pressed everything towards the pocket, right? So I stitch this first with the zipper foot, stitch this. You want to stop with the zipper foot like about here and then finish stitching with your regular foot because the zipper foot just doesn't do a good job. But it's perfect for zippers. And I'll show you, I've done the other side. I'll show you what I mean about the pocket. So this one has been sewn from here to here, and when you open it up you can see that I don't have any of those stitching marks. I missed a little tiny bit up here, so you can see this original stitching where the pocket was and then my seam allowance. I'm okay with that, but the rest of this all the way down looks pretty good. It's encased inside, so I'm happy with that. And then I haven't finished pressing this yet, but the last bit for the pockets that you want to do is you want to press them towards the front and baste this flange, this pocket flange, to the front waistband. Just baste it up there, that way when you go to sew the top to the bottom it won't be flopping around and you'll know that it's in the right place. So that's the last, very last step for our pockets. And then we're going to put in the zipper. One other thing I wanted to mention, they talk about clipping down here at the bottom because we want the pocket to move forward and we don't want to bump in the seam there. And if we moved the pocket forward, then we've got this funny seam thinging going on. So what you do is right at the juncture of the side seam and the bottom of the pocket. So this is the juncture of the side seam and the bottom of the pocket. We're just going to snip through, but not through the stitching line on the, there we go, through the seam allowance. That allows us to press this seam allowance open, turn the pocket, and press it towards the front, and everything is nice and flat. I need to press that. You can see mine's a little bumpy, so I'm going to press a little bit more, cut it a little bit more. There. And then you'll see what happens. So this pocket goes to the front, and then I can press my seam allowance open, and then I have this really nice flat juncture. Now I don't like cutting into seams, but in this case it's kind of a necessity. It just makes the garment lie a little flatter, and there's no stress on that seam unless you're jamming your hands into your pockets, and even then that would be up here, so it shouldn't be a problem. All right, I'm going to finish up my other pocket. All right, we have finished our pockets, and they look absolutely gorgeous. This is the pocket. Look at how beautiful that is. You almost don't even see it, right? The seam is gorgeous, but yet I know that my hand can go in there. That's my pocket. And these sewing techniques, these elevated techniques, a little bit more beyond the Vogue pattern, like understitching the pocket and using my zipper foot to sew this seam, make this pocket beautiful. Now, did it take me an extra, half an hour maybe to do all 4 pockets? Sure, but that pocket's gorgeous. The garment is going to live longer, and I'm going to be happier wearing it. This pocket isn't going to come out. It's not going to be flopping around. It's attached at the top, and this is stitched down. And also, I don't have any superfluous seams here from the other seams. You don't see them because I used my zipper foot, so I had to change my foot a couple of times. Worth it in the long run. So now we're going to sew the top to the bottom, and again, I like to lay my pieces out in front of me the way that they're going to go. So here's my bottom, and then I'm going to take my top pieces. Now the instructions call to tack this together. I just used a pin because I want to have a little bit of flexibility to see how this is actually going to play out. Because this is really where the rubber meets the road, right? These seams need to line up, and we want to make sure that the garment fits the way it's supposed to, but also that structurally it looks right. So this side seam needs to line up, the darts need to line up, the tucks need to line up. So we want to work our way through that. So I know that this is my front, center front, and my center front. So you have right sides up, so now I'm just going to flip this garment over, and I'm going to start pinning. So I'm going to start at this side seam here. That's my first mark. And since there's a lot of seaming here, I want to try as best I can to have one seam go one way and one seam go the other. If you open your seams, then you shouldn't have a problem. I tend to serge mine together, so I need to butt them. So I'm going to pin the end seam here. And I'm going to put the heavier piece on the bottom. That fits together really well. My darts are pretty close, and since the top one is dark, I'm going to be able to have a little fudge error room there. So that piece goes together really well. Let's see what happens when we get to the pleats. So this is the first pleat, and that is supposed to line up with this first pleat, and look at that, it's pretty good. I'm going to just tack my center front for the moment. And here's the thing, I want to make sure I get this dead on center. If you are unsure about putting this together, baste it on your machine, which is my intention. My intention is to take this to the machine after I pin it and baste it using the longest stitch, just to make sure I'm really happy. Because if there's a little error that I need to make, a little correction, I only have to rip out a little bit, and it's a basting stitch. So that way I have an opportunity to fix just a small section instead of having to rip the whole seam out. So I've started by pinning all the critical seams, my side seams and the sides, the ends, the back. And then now I'm going back through here and I'm pinning some of these other ones. And my darts seem to be lining up really well. I'm happy with the way they're lining up. Of course, it's hard to tell until you sew them. And you know, the background is dark, the upper part is dark, so that works in my favor. But it seems to be fitting together really, really well. And there's a lot of fabric here with the pleats, the multiple pleats on the line, the bottom piece, and the pleats on the top piece. So there's a lot going on. So I have this pinned, and I'm going to take it to the machine and just baste it because I want to make sure that everything is exactly where I want it. Our dress is really starting to take shape. I have sewn the top to the bottom, and it looks fabulous. I did have so I basted it first, and I did have one intersection where the pleats just didn't line up, and I had to rip it out, and I was really happy that I basted it first. And then I went back and stitched it, and I actually overlocked it because this fabric is just gravelly, it's a nightmare, and pressed it down. So look at how beautiful that is. And the pressing as you go thing is really important. You'd be surprised. So here's one pleat. Look at how that lines up beautifully. And I'm really happy that I didn't baste down these pleats. I think they look better open. They mirror the ones above it. Here's my center line. It's right on track. So the pattern went together really well. So the patterning is lovely. Now I'm going to skip over the belt. We'll do that after. And I'm going to put the zipper in. And if you've never put an invisible zipper in, it doesn't take very long. It's super easy, and you'll love them. Once you start putting them in, you're going to love them. So I opted for a tan zipper because this is going to transition between the dark brown and the tan at the bottom. I figured the tan would be better, and it is an invisible zipper. First thing you want to do is press the teeth. You want to roll them and press them flat, because the thing about the invisible zipper is that the teeth are in the back, not in the front. So we want to roll them out to make them a little easier for us to sew. Then I'm going to lay my dress. This is the back, face up, so I can see what I'm doing. Again, I like to always know where I'm at and what's going on. Now, one of the things that we want to be very clear in is that this line is perfect when we sew on our zipper. That's really important, because that, especially since these are two different colors, it's going to stick out like a sore thumb. So I'm going to close up my zipper, and I'm going to lay my zipper right side up also, because I know now that everything is up looking at me the way it's supposed to be. So I want to sew this flange to this side of the garment. So now my bodice is face up and my zipper is face up, and I want to sew this flange on this side, on the right side, on your right side, to this side of the garment. So right sides together. So I want to turn this, and I'm just going to throw a pin in there, and now I know that this is the side of the zipper that I want to sew, because this is what I want. I want, right, a nice finished edge and the zipper to be invisible. So I'm going to line the top of my zipper tape. Just going to move it a little bit so it's lined up with the top of my garment. And this is the finished edge of the top back. We'll end up putting a hook and eye in here, but this is how this is going to go. So now I can unzip my zipper, and I'm going to sew this all the way down with my zipper foot. All right, first half of the zipper is sewn in, and I can zip it up and check. One of the beauties of an invisible zipper is if you don't sew it close enough the first time to make it invisible, you can go back and do it again. I mean, you don't want to sew over the teeth, obviously, because then you won't be able to zip it up. But that looks pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. Look at how nice that looks. All right, now we have a couple of things that we need to be conscious of. We need to be conscious of this middle seam, because we want that to be perfect across the back. And we also want to be conscious of where we finished, because we want to finish exactly the same on the next side. So again, we lie it back down so we can see it's facing us. And this zipper is going to go this way, face up. Let's pull it close so you can see it. Face up. So we want to be at the same spot at the top. This fabric's very bouncy. we want to be at the same spot at the top, right? Because we want this, we don't want the top to be crooked in the back. We want them to be even. So we want to make sure that the zipper starts in the same spot. And we also want to make sure that this lines up down here. So a couple of things that we can do to make that happen. We can, the first thing we want to do obviously is to pin this zipper right side. So we're going to flip it over because once again we want it right sides together. I'm just going to throw a pin in there so it's not going to move around and I know that it's in the right spot. So those, my two top pieces are lined up. So I'm happy with the way that those are lined up. That's good. The next spot that we need to worry about is this juncture here. And to do that, I'm going to turn my garment inside out. One of the reasons we put this pin here is now we don't want this zipper to twist or anything. So this will help us to make sure that we get the zipper in the right place. So now I have my garment inside out along the zipper line. My zipper is still intact here. I know that this is in the right spot up here at the top. And what I want to do is I want to line up this seam allowance and pin this free side of my back to the zipper where it's supposed to go. And if you want to be dead on, like perfect, I would take a needle and thread and just put a little stitch in there because that is actually off just a smidge and that will drive me crazy. But you can look, you can peek after you pin it, you can peek, that looks really good, see how they're lined up there. And then you're going to go down here and you're going to do the same thing with this tail end. I want this to land exactly in the same spot where I landed before because that will help me finish the garment. Now you don't need to go all the way to the end of the zipper and the pole is in the way anyway and you'll get bumps, and this is one of the beauties of an invisible zipper. So if I turn it back inside right, a lot of dress here, I can see now that my zipper is pinned up here at the top. This juncture looks really good and this looks really good. And again, if you're a little nervous about it, go ahead and baste it. And now that I've done that, I can unzip it. I won't be able to unzip it past this pin, so I'll have to do that when I get there. But I can take this to the machine and start stitching this side of the zipper. All right, let's see how we did. I haven't zipped this up yet because when you go to zip this up, it's a little scary sometimes. It looks like it's all twisted around and it isn't. Well, it is, but you have to kind of play with it a little to get it where it's supposed to be because the bottom half of the garment is open, right? This is still, we haven't sewed this bottom seam yet. But let's see how we did. I mean, that went up super fast, right? So this is right on. This is right on across. And this little tail I missed, so I have to go back and sew this down to here because I need to make sure that's the same. Also, it's not quite as close as I would like it, so I'm going to go back and stitch it again because I don't want to see the zipper. Up here it looks really good. Down here it's a little far apart. So I actually can just go back in. Oops, I missed some threads. I actually can just go back in and stitch it, open it up and stitch it a little closer to the teeth, and that will take care of that. But I'm really happy the way that landed, and this is an easy fix. So once I've finished that, I'm going to probably use a needle and thread to finish up these zippers. It takes a little bit of finesse, but you line up. The reason you want to stop in the same place is because you set this back into your machine with the zipper foot on, or you do it by hand, whatever works best for you. And you start right there where you finished. Right, you're gonna start right there and do the zipper, use the zipper foot for a couple of inches, and then that will finish this off, and then sew the rest of the back with your regular foot. And then we are in great shape. The zipper's done. We're going to put a hook and eye up here on the top to keep this closed. We are going to hem it, and that's it. Now hemming is really critical because one of the critical steps that you want to consider when you're hemming is what you're going to wear for undergarments and what shoes you're going to wear, because that will determine the hem length. We also need to finish our sash, and I'm going to pull out the instructions for that because that is pretty simple. So we have two ties. Yes, so we're going to fold these in half and we're going to press them and we're going to stitch them. And it says, is it a regular seam allowance? It is. So you're going to stitch them and stitch off and stitch all the way down to the end, right? And then turn it and press it. And then we will pin them to the back and we'll look at that at the very end. Okay. Pretty great. We're almost done. Okay, before we move forward, I want to backpedal a little. When you change patterns around, sometimes you have to read forward to go backwards. And when I got to the back step, I realized that I put the zipper in and hadn't put the ties in. But what you want to do is add these ties, and you're going to make them, they're very simple. You make sure you get a nice point at the end. And then you want to add them to the back seam before you add the zipper in. Before you actually sew the zipper in, you want to lay these down and just baste them to the seam, raw edges to raw edges. That way when you put the zipper in, you have this really nice finish on the ties, which come around to the front. So that was pretty simple. Have this really pretty tie here. All right, let's talk about how low this puppy is, okay? You can see a picture here. I tried it on and my slip was a good 4 inches that was showing. So I knew that I wanted to at least have something that came up that far. That's about as comfortable as I am going low. I didn't want this huge V going down. So I simply took the same fabric that I used for my top and I turned it into just a little triangle. I covered it with the, backed it with the lining because this fabric is scratchy. That's the reason we lined it. And then I'm going to just put it on and pin it where I would like it. All right, so this is one of these things that you need to have it on you, and you can have someone pin it or you can pin it on yourself, and then I'm just going to hand stitch it on there. You could do it with the machine, but I think that this garment is so pretty and elegant, you really don't want to have any top stitching. There isn't any anywhere else. It's all done really well. So I'm just going to hand stitch that in so that covers the area. The last thing on our list is to hem it. I am going to serge it and turn it up 1.5 inches and top stitch it. So that is pretty simple, and we didn't hem the sleeves on this one because we used the salvage edge of the fabric, but if you had to hem it, it would be the same deal. You could serge it and turn it up, or turn it up twice if you don't have a serger. I'll say that I like this. It's really cute. We solved this problem without changing the structure of the garment. You could do this in a contrasting fabric too, but I kind of wanted to keep it all the same. This would look really cute up there too also. But that, you know, that's all design, and that's why we sew, right? So we make it the way we want it and it looks the way we like it. So I'm just going to finish the hem and then take some photos. Our dress is finished. I love it. It's gorgeous and perfect for a party, ready to go. You know, it's great cruise wear, vacation wear. People dress up on the cruise but don't go into those super formal outfits. So there's gold, this little shiny copper and gold threads running through here make it dressy enough, and it's full length so it looks great with a cute little pair of shoes. It's super comfy, packs really well. This stuff is just great to pack with. You don't have to iron it, which is one thing you want when you're packing. There's no ironing. So we are all done with this super cute Vogue pattern, and I hope you liked this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. All the rest of the details will be down below in the box where you can find a post to go with this that will highlight everything. Until next time, happy sewing. Bye.